Welcome back to the library, dear wanderers. Today we're gonna head back to Library Wing 1, the Hidden Nest, back to the first Oak's shelf, where we'll pick up the first work we see. This one was brought to the library by Carlson de Clare. Now without further ado, Rock of Antiquity. A traveler passed by a ruin in the desert, tired and ragged, with holes in his shoes. He wandered on his way. The sand drifted off his tired legs, the dust of 1,000 roads sifting off his torn and used up coat. As he walked through the ruin, he leaned against a great arch. He paused, resting from the many miles before and the many left to go. Ruined and shattered bricks surrounded the towering structure, buildings torn apart by the ages. But although crumbling at the sides, the arch stood proud in the midst of the desolation, the last thing intact on the barren waste, strange and otherworldly in the vast expanse. Perhaps it had been the marker of some great victory, the last memory of the bravery of kingdoms, or the doorway to a beautiful temple where the devout of a forgotten time had bowed their heads in hope. Proud as the day the last brick was laid, it shouted hubris into the heavens. Its tall pillars gracefully reach up to the arch, effortlessly supporting the vaulted arch of marble. Its carved designs were still defiantly visible on the cracked and worn stone. As he rested, he took a stone from the old and worn pathway. He carved his name on the arch, his tired hands scraping the rock against a brick in the wall. He scratched his name on the wall amidst the signs and motifs of an ancient land. Dropping the stone, the man went his way again, his footsteps fading in the dry desert dust. Simply a traveler that had paused there on his way to far-away wonders. But his name stayed there, carved on the wall. The brick it was scrawled on lay in its place, loosened from the mortar by the etching. As the years went by and the sands shifted, this brick fell from its place. It landed on the ancient desert path, the name still bold on its worn side. The lazy sun crawled by 1,000 more times, and along that tired road a tyrant king passed, stumbling on the stone in the archway. He tripped and struck his head on the wall. As he bled there, his kingdom rejoiced at his death. They took the stone that killed him and laid it in a place of honor on the roadside, the name still etched on the side. The kingdom grew, and many passed that way, gazing in wonder at the stone and its story. They read and spoke the name aloud, the hero that freed them. The days flickered by, the harsh heat changing to the cool stillness of moonlit desert nights, the dim grey light of morning changing to the thin red rays of a setting sun. The wind blew the dunes shifting like slow waves in an ocean of sand. The brick on the roadside was hailed by 1,000 different strangers, the story told in as many languages. Kings traveled to the spot and were crowned before it. Passing travelers touched the stone for luck and a safe journey. But time crawled on. Stories were told and forgotten. Kingdoms rose and fell in that desert land. The name and story, once told in speeches and songs, slipped into memory. Truth turned into legend, which faded into myth. The dusty desert path fell silent. The only sounds, the lonely and weary steps of traders and travelers that camped under the arch. The shimmering sunlight danced across the water. The bright summer sun pierced through the palm fronds, flashing in specks on the bank. The river flowed lazily by, casting shadows and beams of light that danced on the trees. Off in the distance, the river slowly meandered through the dunes, the only sign of life in the dusty stillness of the desert. Decrepit and broken, the dunes half covered the dusty road. On this worn and forgotten path sat the arch, old and lonely in the landscape that was changed and unfamiliar. A river ran past it, bubbling and rippling, where before there was only sand and the silence of the desert. Age had finally taken its toll. The arch had crumbled, pillars and bricks littering the path and riverbed, the water gently lapping on the stones. The carved designs and motifs were faint, worn away by sand, water, and the slow passage of innumerable years. But on the bank of the river, proud and unyielding, a few pillars still reached up into the sky, supporting the broken edges of an arch. The last splendor of kingdoms that had long since wandered into the fog of history. Next to this ruin was a shrine, a carved pedestal of stone, its gold leaf worn away, spelled words in a language now forgotten. It still told a story of kingdoms and heroes long dead, but it showed these words to an empty land, like a decrepit bard singing a tale to an empty house. On this stand of stone and battered gold, a brick was enthroned. It was cracked and misshapen, its corners worn smooth with time, but as the day turned to dusk and the last rays of the sun darted across the stone, a faint name could be made out on the smooth, weathered surface. A name once sung in verse by kings and bards. The burning desert sun cast a last few beams of sunlight dancing faintly on the dunes. The last sliver of sun painted the cloudless sky a rainbow of purple and orange. A sky that faded to star-speckled blackness on the opposite horizon. The last ray of sunlight twinkling faintly on the ruin of the arch, faint in the vast silence of the empty waste. In the twilight, a faint footstep could be heard. The tired tread of a weary traveler returning. Sometimes it's the smallest deeds by an immortal soul that can leave an impact stronger than the rest of their life. For now, though, we shall move on to the next work. This one brought to the library by Dr. Everett Mann. Now, without further ado, The Adventures of Cousin Dan, Rearview, Eddie. Ever had a friend that was too slow? I know I have, and it can be mighty frustrating. Before you think you got it bad, let me tell you, it could be worse. You could have the problem my cousin Dan had. Let me tell you about it. My cousin Dan had a friend by the name of Rearview Eddie. He was called this on account of all you would like to see of him was his back. He was so fast he'd catch your own breath for you. When he took it in his head to go somewhere, he'd get there before he left. Had to go back a different way or he'd meet himself coming. He was so fast, he raced sunbeams for fun. And that was the trouble. You see, old Eddie, he was too fast. Dan and him would go hunting, and he'd catch his limit before Dan got out his gun. They'd go fishing, and Eddie'd have a full bucket before Dan's baiting his hook. If they went on a trip, Eddie would get back before Dan grabbed his toothbrush and spare britches. It got so that Dan couldn't hardly do anything with Eddie. This didn't suit either of them, so they figured on slowing Eddie down somehow. First thing they tried, glue. Sure enough, it stuck Eddie to the ground. Trouble was, the ground wasn't stuck to nothing, so Eddie just walked kind of funny with sod on his feet. Next, they tried loading Eddie down with stones, but Eddie kept dropping them, and at his speed, it was like a cannonball blast. After that, they tried putting a lead boot on him. It worked for a bit, but at the next barn dance, it shook loose and concussed poor Dudley Bonner. It were beginning to look like nothing was going to work, but Dad wasn't the sort to give up easy, and he decided to try one more time. So he sat down and had himself a think. While he was thinking, some kids came out of the schoolyard to jaw on how school was too slow, and how it seemed to take forever. Well, that's when Dad got himself an idea. See, time's like water. It flows everywhere, and in some places it soaks in. Schools are one of them places, so doctors' waiting rooms and the government office. And that's why it seems to take so long when you're in there on account of all the extra time. He marched over to the schoolhouse and knocked on the roof lightly, being a polite fellow. Miss Malley, the school mom, asked him what he wanted in such a tone that made even Dan feel small. Dan explained that he needed to slow his friend up. He asked if he might take some of the school's time and give it to Eddie. Well, it seems school passes as slow for teachers as it did for students, and she was right willing to donate. So Dan, he gets himself a ladle and dips up some of the time that got stuck in the schoolhouse. He put it into a green bottle, stopped it, and gave it to Eddie. Eddie drank up some of the time, and sure enough, he started to slow down right off. And ever after, whenever he started getting too fast, he'd get some time from the classroom before it could pile up too much and make school too long. And that's why kids in Deadwood Valley are the happiest in the world. And if that ain't every word of it, truth may storm along, blow me down. And with that, we've come to the end of our readings, dear wanderers. Thank you very much for coming. I would have loved to read the next one, but it was 20 minutes long, and I don't have 20 more minutes for recording. But, again, thank you very much for coming. It is always an honor reading for you. Good luck out there, and I hope to see you all next time.